let's get right into it. We just heard about a very coherent, integrated model of co-ops that gets results. And one of the keys to its success is probably that clear focus, or put differently, its limited offerings. And I think that's its strength, right, as it's set itself up. Against that backdrop, I do want to clarify one thing I said on my end as I was asking a question around sort of who's the customer of higher ed and the student in this other role. I do think this sort of student as client / product framing, if you will, it's a useful construct for certain institutions and students, probably not all. And I know you've done work with Michael Crow at ASU categorizing different kinds of institutions, which we've talked about, of course, before in this show. But I think that's where I want to go with you, Jeff, is exploring this particular kind of institution. We heard Bob say that he thinks the co-op is a scalable model, that other universities can adopt it, particularly if faculty drop their animus toward industry, if you will. We heard him say that it's scalable, even as Kettering itself is relatively small, about 1,600 students. So I'd love to imagine with you how one might scale this model. I think it's not hard to imagine perhaps how a new university might build around a co-op model, but if you were a more comprehensive university, I know you've said it's the end of comprehensive U for many, but you're sitting there existing with lots of different majors. You've got humanities majors, STEM majors, social science, right? The range of things. Could you move to a co-op model? And if so, how would you do it?
Yeah. So first of all, I think you can. I don't think it's as easy as many people think it is. And I think that's why so many universities don't do it, at least require it across the curriculum. I think it's less about the animus that faculty have against industry. It's more that they just think their discipline is the most important thing, and they don't necessarily want to open up room in the curriculum for jobs, essentially. So I think that's part of the problem, is that do we have to create some room in the curriculum? And then the second thing is we do have to find all of these employers. Even Northeastern tells us often that it's hard to set up all these employer partnerships, which often has to be a centralized office. So that's a whole infrastructure that you have to build. This is where I do think if we had intermediaries, the way that Ryan Craig talks about them in the apprenticeship world, could we have intermediaries in the co-op world that help set up these entities or these partnerships with employers? Because if you don't have the partnerships with employers, then it's hard for students to find those co-ops. It's very bespoke to them, much like it is with internships, and then I'm not quite sure it's really part of the curriculum. And then you have to figure out, okay, what do we do mainly for those majors that don't lead necessarily to very specific jobs? You just mentioned the humanities, which I think is a really good one. So what are the industries that you're going to have students participate in? And then how do you develop kind of what I would call student learning outcomes? Northeastern does a really interesting thing on this, Michael, is that before you go into a co-op, you need to talk about what you want to learn out of it, how you're going to prepare for it. It's really kind of going into almost a new job. And then when you come out of the co-op, you write about and you talk about your kind of learning outcomes, which I don't think happens enough in higher education in general, letting students drive those conversations. So that's how I would set this up. But there's a decent amount of infrastructure there. That's problem one. So I think that's why having an external partner, having an intermediary do that, I think is critically important. And then second, I do think we have to rethink the curriculum in a way, because otherwise we're going to basically add a year on top of probably what is already the 4-year degree, right? What do you think?
Well, and I think you've seen that, right? Certain co-op models, that's why they're 5 years, I think, right? Is it's a little bit of even at Northeastern, right? There's a little bit of a wrestling match, as you said. Faculty say, hey, they have to take X, right? That has to be part of the major requirement. There's no way, sociology, you can graduate without having taken this particular course or this particular thing in this distribution, whatever it might be. And so often majors, we tend to see that they stack up in courses. Very rarely do you say, oh, you could just do, I guess, 18 credits or something for a major. That would feel like a minor, right, in the schools. And so that's part of clearly what's going on. I think the other piece of that is what you just said, this infrastructure. And from my perspective, I've always wondered, like, could a Northeastern that does it at such scale. I think it's 6,000 plus employers. Could they spin that out, right, as its own entity and sort of have it as an intermediary? Or is it just, all for us, right? They're becoming global in nature. And so they would never do that. And you need someone else to come in and make that play. But that strikes me as like a second barrier.